I stood in the hallway, clutching the faded photograph of my late husband, my hands trembling, my heart pounding so loud I could barely hear my daughter-in-law's voice echoing from the living room. "You don't belong here anymore, Nancy. This isn't your family." For a moment, I wondered if I'd ever been part of it at all. I suppose if you'd asked me 5 years ago, I never would have believed my life could unravel so completely. I was always the quiet one at family gatherings, the woman who baked too many pies at Thanksgiving, who remembered everyone's birthday, who sent handwritten cards just because. My home was filled with the soft ticking of clocks, the scent of lavender sachets tucked in drawers, and the laughter of grandchildren running through the halls. But all that changed the day my son brought home his new wife, Julia. At first, I welcomed her with open arms. She was beautiful, clever, and seemed to adore my son, Daniel. I wanted so badly to believe she'd be the daughter I never had. But there was something in her eyes, a coldness, a calculation, that I tried to ignore. The first sign was small. My favorite teacup, a delicate porcelain piece from my own mother, vanished from the kitchen. Julia shrugged when I asked. "It must have gotten broken, Nancy. These old things happen." I let it go. But then, my late husband's war medals disappeared from the mantel. Julia said she was tidying up. Daniel was too busy with work to notice. It wasn't just things that vanished. It was memories. Photographs from our family trips, my wedding ring, which I'd taken off only to knead bread, even the quilt my grandmother made for me as a child. All gone. Each time I asked, Julia would smile that tight, perfect smile and say, "You must be getting forgetful, Nancy. Maybe it's time you let go of the past." I started to doubt myself. I'd always prided myself on my memory, my attention to detail. But Julia was relentless. She whispered to Daniel that I was slipping, that I needed help. The grandchildren stopped visiting my room. I'd hear Julia telling them, "Grandma's tired today. Let's leave her alone." But I wasn't tired. I was being erased. The house that once felt like mine became a museum of Julia's taste, cold, modern, and spotless. My friends stopped calling. Julia told them I was resting, or not up for visitors. Even the neighbors, people I'd known for decades, began to look at me with pity. I tried to fight back in small ways. I left notes for myself, reminders of where I'd put things. I kept a diary, writing down every slight, every missing object. But Julia was always one step ahead. She found my diary and laughed. "Paranoid much, Nancy? Maybe you really do need help." The worst was Daniel, my only son. He grew distant, distracted. Julia told him I'd accused her of stealing, of lying. She showed him my diary, my desperate attempt to hold on to reality, and he looked at me with a mixture of embarrassment and concern. "Mom, maybe you should see someone. You're not yourself." I wanted to scream. I wanted to shake him, to make him see what was happening. But I didn't. I just smiled and told him I loved him. That night, I sat alone in my room, the walls closing in. I could hear Julia's laughter downstairs, the clinking of glasses. My heart ached with a pain so deep I thought it might swallow me whole. But I wasn't ready to give up. Not yet. The next morning, I woke to the sound of Julia's heels clicking down the hallway, sharp, decisive, like a judge's gavel. Sunlight filtered through the curtains, dust motes swirling in the air. I lay there for a moment, listening to the distant hum of the coffee machine, the muffled voices downstairs. My room, once a sanctuary, now felt like a cell. I dressed slowly, choosing my softest cardigan, the one with tiny embroidered violets. It was a small act of rebellion. Julia hated old lady clothes. I tucked my diary into the pocket, determined not to let her find it again. Downstairs, Julia was already orchestrating the morning. She stood by the kitchen island, her phone glued to her ear, barking orders to the cleaning lady. Daniel sat at the table, scrolling through emails, oblivious to the tension in the room. The grandchildren, Ella and Max, were nowhere to be seen. I cleared my throat. "Good morning." Julia didn't look up. "Morning, Nancy. The kids are busy with homework. Maybe you should rest today." I poured myself a cup of coffee, hands shaking. The mug was new, plain, white, soulless. Another reminder that my things were gone. I tried to catch Daniel's eye, but he was already lost in his world. After breakfast, I wandered into the garden. The roses I'd planted years ago were blooming, their scent heavy in the air. I knelt to deadhead a blossom, the thorns pricking my fingers. As I worked, I heard voices over the fence, Mrs. Harper and her husband, my neighbors for over 30 years. "Nancy, is that you?" Mrs. Harper called. I stood, brushing dirt from my knees. "It's me." She frowned, glancing at the house. "We haven't seen you in ages. Is everything all right?" I hesitated. The urge to confide in her was overwhelming, but I could almost feel Julia's eyes on me from the kitchen window. "I've been busy. Things have changed." Mrs. Harper pressed her lips together. "If you ever need anything, you know where we are." I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. "Thank you." That afternoon, Julia announced she was redecorating the house. "It's time for a fresh start," she said, her tone sweet as syrup. "We'll clear out all this old clutter." I watched in horror as she boxed up family photos, my mother's china, even the crocheted afghan from my wedding day. I tried to protest, but Daniel just shrugged. "Julia has good taste, Mom. Let her do her thing." That night, I cried for the first time in years. Not just for the things I'd lost, but for the memories being swept away like dust. I thought of my late husband, his steady hands, his gentle voice. I wished he were here to see what was happening. But then, a strange thing happened. As I was wiping my tears, I found an old letter tucked inside a book, my husband's handwriting, strong and familiar. It was a love letter, written on our 10th anniversary. In it, he wrote, "No matter what happens, Nancy, you are the heart of this family. Never let anyone tell you otherwise." His words lit a spark in me. I realized I couldn't let Julia erase me, not without a fight. The next day, I started making quiet inquiries. I called my old friend Linda from church. I told her everything, every missing item, every cruel word. Linda listened, her voice trembling with anger. "You can't let her do this, Nancy. You have rights. You're not alone." For the first time in months, I felt hope. But Julia wasn't finished. That evening, I overheard her on the phone, speaking in hushed tones. "She's losing it, Daniel. I think it's time we looked into a facility for her. Somewhere safe." My blood ran cold. I knew then that Julia's campaign wasn't just about redecorating. She wanted me gone. Out of the house, out of the family, out of their lives. But I wasn't going anywhere. That night, I barely slept. Every creak of the house set my nerves on edge. I kept replaying Julia's words in my mind. A facility for her. As if they were a sentence already handed down. But as the dawn crept in through the curtains, I made a decision. I would not let Julia write the end of my story. I began my day with purpose. First, I called Linda again, asking if she'd help me gather my thoughts and document everything that had happened. "Of course, Nancy," she said, her voice warm and steady. "You're not crazy. I believe you." We met at the little park near the church, where the air smelled of cut grass and the distant aroma of cinnamon rolls from the bakery on Main Street. I brought my diary, the letter from my husband, and a list of missing items. Linda listened, took notes, and even snapped photos of the empty spaces on my shelves, where my treasures once sat. "Start keeping a record of everything," she advised. "Dates, times, what's said, what's missing. If Julia tries to have you declared incompetent, you'll need proof you're of sound mind." I felt a flicker of hope. I wasn't helpless. I had allies. Back at home, Julia's campaign escalated. She started locking doors, my own bedroom door, at times when she thought I wasn't looking. She changed the Wi-Fi password so I couldn't use the computer, telling Daniel I'd messed up the settings again. She even intercepted my mail, handing me only bills and junk. But I found ways around her. I started hiding important things in the garden shed, beneath the floorboards in the attic, even inside the lining of my winter coat. I left myself coded notes, phrases only I would understand, tucked inside recipe books and behind picture frames. One afternoon, I overheard Julia on the phone again. "She's getting worse, Daniel. She accused me of stealing her jewelry. I think she's paranoid. The kids are scared of her." I wanted to scream. I wanted to march into the living room and confront her, but I knew it would only play into her hands. Instead, I waited until Daniel was alone in the garage, fixing the old lawnmower. "Daniel," I said quietly, "can we talk?" He looked up, surprised. "Sure, Mom. What's up?" I hesitated, searching his face for the boy I'd raised, the one who used to bring me dandelions and ask me to read him stories. "Do you remember the trip we took to Yellowstone? The time you got lost and I found you by the river?" He smiled, a genuine smile I hadn't seen in months.
"Yeah."
"You said you'd always find me, no matter what." I nodded, my throat tight. "I need you to believe me now. Julia is trying to get rid of me. She's taken my things, told lies about me. I'm not losing my mind, Daniel. I'm still your mom." He frowned, uncertainty flickering in his eyes. "Julia says you're confused. She says you're not well." I took his hand, squeezing it gently. "I know what's real, Daniel. I know what's happening. Please just watch. Listen. Don't let her turn you against me." He pulled his hand away, glancing toward the house. "I have to go, Mom. We'll talk later." As he left, I felt the old ache in my chest, the sense of being invisible. But I also felt a new resolve. I would not let Julia win. That evening, as I sat in my room, I heard a soft knock at the door. It was Ella, my granddaughter, holding a crumpled drawing. "Grandma," she whispered, "did you really lose your necklace? Mommy says you did, but I saw her put it in her purse." My heart leapt. "Thank you for telling me, sweetheart. Can you show me which purse?" Ella nodded, her eyes wide and solemn. "It's the red one. In her closet." After she left, I wrote everything down. Ella's words, the time, the details. I felt a surge of hope. Maybe, just maybe, the truth would come out. But the next day, Julia found my diary again. This time, she tore out the pages and burned them in the fireplace, her eyes cold and triumphant. "You're done, Nancy," she hissed. "You have nothing left." But she was wrong. The next morning, I woke to the sound of rain tapping gently against the window. The house was eerily quiet. No children's laughter, no clatter from the kitchen. I sat on the edge of my bed, feeling the ache in my bones, and wondered how much more I could endure. But then I remembered Ella's brave little confession and the way Linda had squeezed my hand in the park. I wasn't alone, not really. There were still threads of love and truth woven through my life, even if Julia tried to unravel them. I decided to take a walk, umbrella in hand, through the neighborhood. The air was heavy with the scent of wet earth and blooming lilacs. As I passed Mrs. Harper's house, I saw her waving from the porch, her husband beside her with a mug of coffee. "Nancy, coming out of the rain," she called. I hesitated, but something in her voice, warm, insistent, pulled me in. I sat at their kitchen table, hands wrapped around a steaming cup of tea. The kitchen was cluttered and cozy, filled with the smells of cinnamon and old wood. "We've been worried about you," Mrs. Harper said gently. "You don't seem yourself lately." I looked at her, at the kindness in her eyes, and the words spilled out, everything. The missing heirlooms, Julia's lies, the isolation, even the threat of the nursing home. I expected disbelief, maybe even pity. But instead, Mr. Harper set his mug down with a thump. "That woman's no good," he said gruffly. "We've seen the way she talks to you. Heard her yelling at the kids, too." Mrs. Harper nodded. "You know, I used to work in social services. If Julia is trying to declare you incompetent, she'll need more than just her word. You have rights, Nancy. And you have friends." A weight lifted from my chest. I wasn't invisible. My pain was real, and someone else saw it. Mrs. Harper offered to help me document everything, to talk to the neighbors, even to reach out to Daniel if needed. She suggested I hide a small tape recorder in my room, just in case. I agreed, feeling a cautious hope bloom inside me. As I left their house, I noticed a strange car parked across the street, a sleek, black sedan I didn't recognize. A man sat inside, sunglasses on despite the rain. He watched me as I walked by, and I felt a chill run down my spine. Back home, Julia was waiting in the foyer, arms crossed. "Where have you been?" "I went for a walk," I replied, keeping my voice steady. She sneered. "You shouldn't wander off. What if something happened to you?" I brushed past her, heart pounding, and retreated to my room. There, tucked behind a loose floorboard, I found a stack of old letters, my husband's handwriting, but these I'd never seen before. My hands shook as I unfolded the first one. It was dated almost 40 years ago, just after Daniel was born. In it, my husband wrote about a trust fund he'd set up for me and Daniel to protect us from any future misfortune. He mentioned a lawyer, a safe deposit box, and a key hidden in the garden shed. My mind raced. Could this be the answer? Had Julia somehow discovered the trust and tried to cut me out? Was this why she was so desperate to get rid of me? I waited until nightfall, then slipped out to the garden shed. The air was thick with the smell of damp earth and rust. I searched behind the old gardening tools, and there, taped to the underside of a shelf, was a small brass key. My heart hammered in my chest. I hid the key in my pocket and returned to my room, barely daring to breathe. The next day, I called Linda and told her everything. She insisted on driving me to the bank, where I presented the key and my ID. The clerk led us to a private room and opened the safe deposit box. Inside were documents, original deeds to the house, the trust paperwork, and a stack of photographs. There was also a letter addressed to Daniel in my husband's handwriting. Linda squeezed my hand. "This is your proof, Nancy. Julia can't take this from you." Tears blurred my vision as I realized what I held. Not just legal documents, but the truth. The house was mine. The trust protected me. And my husband's words, his faith in me, were stronger than Julia's lies. But as we left the bank, I saw the black sedan again, parked across the street. The man inside was on his phone, watching me. Something told me Julia wasn't working alone. That evening, as I sat at my vanity, the weight of the key and documents heavy in my pocket, I felt a strange mixture of fear and exhilaration. For the first time in months, I had something solid, proof that I wasn't losing my mind, that my place in this family was real and protected. But the presence of the black sedan gnawed at me. I watched from behind the curtains as it idled across the street, headlights off, engine running. I scribbled a note to myself. License plate 4XG 219. Man, mid-40s, brown hair, sunglasses. I tucked the note into my shoe just in case. The next morning, Julia was in a foul mood. I could hear her snapping at the children, her voice sharp as broken glass. Daniel had left early for work, and the house felt colder than ever. I made myself a cup of tea and sat by the window, watching the rain streak down the glass. Suddenly, Julia burst into the room, waving a letter in her hand. "What is this?" she demanded. I glanced at the envelope, official-looking, with the bank's logo in the corner. My heart skipped a beat. She must have intercepted the bank's notification about my visit. "It's my business," I said, meeting her gaze. Julia's eyes narrowed. "You're up to something. I won't let you ruin everything I've built here." I almost laughed at the irony. She, who had tried so hard to erase me, now accusing me of sabotage. But I held my tongue. That afternoon, I hid the documents in a safe place, inside the old upright piano in the parlor, beneath the hammers. I ran my fingers over the yellowed keys, remembering the lullabies I used to play for Daniel. The music was still there, somewhere beneath the dust. Later, as I was dusting the shelves in the living room, I noticed something odd, a stack of legal folders tucked behind Julia's collection of cookbooks. I waited until she left to run errands, then pulled them out and leafed through the pages. My blood ran cold. Inside were forged documents, fake medical reports, letters supposedly from my doctor, even a draft of a petition to have me declared legally incompetent. Julia's handwriting was everywhere, her signature practiced and precise. There were also emails printed out between Julia and a man named Gregory. They discussed accelerating the process, removing obstacles, and ensuring Nancy's cooperation. One line stood out. The PI has been watching her. If she steps out of line, we'll have what we need.
Pi.
Private investigator. The man in the sedan. My hands shook as I photographed every page with my phone, then returned the folders to their hiding place. I sent the photos to Linda, who replied within minutes. This is criminal, Nancy. We need to go to the police. But I hesitated. I knew Julia would deny everything, spin her web of lies even tighter. I needed more, something undeniable. That night, as I lay in bed, I heard footsteps outside my door. I held my breath, listening as Julia whispered into her phone, her voice urgent. She's getting too close. We need to move her out now. The next morning, Daniel approached me in the kitchen, looking exhausted. Mom, Julia says you've been snooping. She's worried about you. I looked him in the eye. Daniel, do you trust me? He hesitated. I want to, Mom. But Julia says. I cut him off. Julia is lying to you. She's been forging documents, planning to steal the house. I have proof. But you have to see it for yourself. He looked torn, his eyes darting toward the hallway where Julia stood, arms folded. Just give me a chance, Daniel. Please. He nodded, barely perceptibly. That afternoon, I heard a soft knock at my door. It was Ella again, her face pale. Grandma, Mommy was yelling at Daddy. She said you're dangerous. I hugged her tightly. You know I'd never hurt anyone, sweetheart. She nodded. I know. I found something in Mommy's room. Do you want to see? My heart pounded as she led me to Julia's closet. Hidden beneath a pile of scarves was a small lockbox. Ella handed it to me, her hands trembling. Inside, I found my missing jewelry, my mother's locket, and most damning of all, my wedding ring. I took photos of everything, my hands shaking with adrenaline and relief. I called Linda and Mrs. Harper. It's time, I said. I'm ready. The next morning, with Linda and Mrs. Harper by my side, I walked into the local police station. I handed over the photos, the forged documents, the emails, and the stolen items. The officer listened carefully, his brow furrowed. This is serious, Mrs. Whitmore. We'll open an investigation immediately. As we left the station, I felt the first rays of hope break through the clouds. I wasn't powerless. I wasn't alone. But I knew the battle wasn't over. Julia would fight back. And the truth, my truth, would finally have its day. The days that followed were a blur of anxiety and anticipation. The police came to the house, asking questions, taking statements. Julia's mask of composure began to crack. She tried to act indignant, but her hands shook as she spoke. Daniel watched it all unfold, his face pale, his eyes darting between us, as if he was finally seeing the woman he'd married in a new, harsher light. The children sensed the tension. Max clung to me, silent and wide-eyed, while Ella hovered at the edges of rooms, watching, listening. Julia retreated to her bedroom for hours at a time, emerging only to glare at me or hiss something under her breath. One afternoon, as I sat in the garden, the scent of peonies thick in the air, Daniel joined me. He looked older, suddenly, a man weighed down by regret. Mom, he said quietly, I'm sorry. I should have listened sooner. I wanted to believe Julia. I wanted to believe our family was okay. I reached for his hand, squeezing it gently. We all want to believe the best of the people we love. That's not weakness, Daniel. But now you see the truth. That's what matters. He nodded, tears glimmering in his eyes. What happens now? I looked at the house, my house, its windows glowing in the afternoon sun. Now we fight for what's right. For our family. That evening, the police returned with a warrant. They searched Julia's room, found the lockbox with my jewelry, the forged documents, even a recorder with snippets of her plotting. Julia screamed, denying everything, but the evidence was overwhelming. As she was led away, she turned to Daniel. You'll regret this. She's manipulating you. She's always been jealous of me. Daniel didn't answer. He just stood there, shoulders slumped, as the woman he thought he loved was taken from our home. The house was quiet that night, eerily so. I wandered through the rooms, touching the familiar objects Julia had tried to erase. My mother's china, my husband's medals, the quilt from my childhood. Each piece was a fragment of my life, a proof that I belonged. But the story wasn't over yet. A few days later, as I was sorting through old letters in the attic, I found a bundle tied with faded ribbon. Inside were letters from my husband to a woman named Margaret, his sister, I realized, whom I'd never met. The letters spoke of a family rift, a secret inheritance, and a promise to protect me and Daniel. One letter caught my eye. It mentioned a lawyer in town, Mr. Crawford, who held the final piece of the puzzle. My heart pounded as I dialed his number. Mr. Crawford, now retired, remembered my husband well. He was a good man, Mrs. Whitmore. He left something for you, a letter, and an envelope to be opened only if you were ever in danger of losing your home. I met him at his office, the air thick with the scent of old books and pipe tobacco. He handed me the envelope, his hands trembling with age. Inside was a legal document, an addendum to the trust, naming me as the sole owner of the house and granting me the power to remove anyone who threatened my well-being. There was also a letter from my husband. Nancy, if you're reading this, it means you've had to fight for what's yours. I'm sorry I can't be there to help you, but know this. You are stronger than you think. Trust yourself. Trust those who love you. Tears streamed down my face as I read his words. I felt his presence beside me, steady and reassuring. When I returned home, Daniel and the children were waiting. Ella ran to me, her arms tight around my waist. Are you okay, Grandma? I knelt down, holding her close. I am now, sweetheart. I am now. That night, as I sat by the window, the house felt different, lighter, warmer. The ghosts of the past had been laid to rest, and the future, though uncertain, was finally mine to shape. But there was one last thing I needed to do. The morning after I returned from Mr. Crawford's office, I woke to a rare sense of peace. Sunlight streamed through the curtains, warm and golden, as if the house itself was finally breathing freely again. For the first time in what felt like years, I didn't feel like a ghost in my own home. But I knew there was unfinished business. The wounds Julia left behind, her cruelty, the lies she planted, still lingered in the air. My family needed healing, and I needed closure. I spent the day baking. The kitchen, once a battleground, filled with the scent of cinnamon and apples. I made Daniel's favorite pie, just like I used to when he was a boy. I even let Ella and Max help, their laughter ringing out as they snuck bites of dough and squabbled over who got to stir. That evening, I called a family meeting. Daniel, the children, Linda, and the Harpers gathered in the living room. I looked around at the faces, some weary, some hopeful, and felt the weight of everything we'd survived. I began quietly, my voice steady. I know the last few months have been hard. I know you've heard things about me that weren't true. But I want you to hear the truth from me. I told them everything. About Julia's campaign to erase me, the missing heirlooms, the forged documents, the lies she whispered to turn them against me. I showed them the trust papers, the letter from my husband, the proof of what she'd done. Daniel sat with his head in his hands, silent tears tracking down his cheeks. I'm so sorry, Mom. I should have seen it. I let her poison everything. I reached for his hand. You're my son. I never stopped loving you. We all make mistakes. What matters is what we do next. Linda spoke up, her voice fierce. Nancy, you fought for your family with more grace and courage than anyone I've ever known. You reminded all of us what real strength looks like. Mrs. Harper nodded, dabbing her eyes. You're not alone, Nancy. You never were. Ella crawled into my lap, her small arms tight around my neck. I missed you, Grandma. I'm glad you're staying. I kissed her hair, breathing in the scent of childhood and hope. After everyone left, Daniel lingered. He looked at me, his eyes searching. How do we move forward from this? I smiled softly. We start small. We forgive. We remember who we are. And we make new memories. The days that followed were filled with gentle routines, meals shared, stories told, laughter slowly returning. The neighbors dropped by with casseroles and flowers. Old friends called, their voices warm and welcoming. Even the house seemed to settle, the shadows receding as light filled every corner. One afternoon, as I sat in the garden, Daniel joined me. He handed me a small box. Inside was my mother's locket, polished and gleaming. "I found it in Julia's things," he said quietly. "I thought you should have it." I pressed the locket to my heart, tears stinging my eyes. "Thank you, Daniel." He sat beside me, silent for a while. "I want you to know, I'm here for you now. Whatever you need." I nodded, the ache in my chest finally easing. That's all I ever wanted. As summer turned to fall, the house became a home again. The grandchildren's laughter echoed through the halls. Friends gathered for Sunday dinners, their voices filling the rooms with warmth and life. I planted new roses in the garden, their blooms a promise of new beginnings. Sometimes, late at night, I'd sit by the window and think of my husband. I'd imagine him beside me, his hand in mine, proud of the woman I'd become. I wasn't the same Nancy who'd once been afraid to speak up, to fight for herself. I was stronger now, wiser, braver, unbreakable. And as I watched the stars wheel across the sky, I knew that no one could ever erase me again. The weeks that followed felt like waking from a long, gray winter into the first bright days of spring. There was a quietness to the house now, but it was the peace of belonging, not the silence of erasure. I found myself humming as I dusted the shelves, pausing to run my fingers over the old photographs Julia had tried to hide. Every frame, every memento, felt like a small victory, a piece of my life reclaimed. I spent more time in the garden, my hands deep in the earth, planting bulbs for next year. Ella and Max helped, their laughter ringing out as they chased butterflies and dug for worms. Sometimes I'd catch Daniel watching us from the porch, a soft smile on his face, as if he too was learning how to breathe again. One afternoon, as the golden light slanted through the trees, Daniel sat beside me on the garden bench. He was quiet for a long time, then finally spoke. "Mom, I keep thinking about everything that happened, about what I let happen. I don't know if I can ever forgive myself." I took his hand, feeling the warmth and weight of it. "Daniel, forgiveness isn't about forgetting. It's about choosing to love, even when it's hard. We both lost our way for a while, but we found each other again. That's what matters." He nodded, tears shining in his eyes. "I promise I'll never let anyone come between us again." That night, I sat at my old writing desk, the one Julia had nearly thrown out. I opened a fresh journal and began to write, not a list of wrongs, but a record of gratitude. For the friends who stood by me. For the neighbors who believed me. For my grandchildren's laughter and my son's embrace. For the memory of my husband, whose love gave me the courage to fight. The investigation into Julia's actions moved forward. She was charged with fraud, theft, and elder abuse. There were court dates, statements, and headlines in the local paper. But I found I no longer needed to follow every detail. Justice was being served, and that was enough. My peace no longer depended on her punishment. The community rallied around me. Old friends reappeared, bringing casseroles and stories. The church ladies invited me back to choir, and I found my voice was stronger than I remembered. Even the children at the local school sent cards, their crayon drawings brightening my kitchen walls. I made a point to reach out to others who seemed lonely or forgotten. I visited the nursing home Julia had threatened me with, bringing cookies and listening to stories. I realized how many people lived on the edge of erasure, how easy it was to become invisible. I promised myself I'd never let that happen to anyone else, if I could help it. As the seasons changed, so did I. I was no longer the timid woman who let herself be pushed aside. I was Nancy Whitmore, mother, grandmother, friend, survivor. I had scars, yes, but they were proof of my endurance, not my defeat. One crisp autumn evening, as I sat by the fire with Ella curled up beside me, she asked, "Grandma, are you happy now?" I thought for a moment, listening to the crackle of the flames, the distant sound of Daniel and Max laughing in the kitchen. I looked at the photos on the mantel, the ones Julia had tried to erase, and felt a deep, quiet joy. "Yes, sweetheart," I said, stroking her hair. "I am. I really am." Because happiness, I realized, isn't about having a perfect life. It's about fighting for your place in the world, holding on to your memories, and choosing, every day, to be true to yourself. It's about forgiving and letting go and opening your heart to love, even after it's been broken. And as I drifted off to sleep that night, the house peaceful around me, I knew that nothing and no one could ever take that away from me again. Thank you for listening to my story. If it touched your heart, please subscribe to the channel and share your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever faced injustice or felt erased by someone close to you? How did you find your strength again? Let's support each other. Your story matters, too.